The German POW camp was unusually quiet that evening. No shouting, no arguments, only the wind moving through the wire and the soft crunch of boots on frozen dirt. Most of the prisoners had already returned to their barracks after dinner. The day had been long, dull, and identical to every other day since their capture. Work details, roll call, waiting. Always waiting. Then something changed. Near the guard post, a British soldier adjusted a small radio sitting on a wooden crate. At first it was just a static, sharp, crackling noise that barely caught anyone's attention, until the music started. It wasn't loud, it wasn't dramatic, but it was clear. A melody drifted across the camp, carried by the cold air. Calm, confident, unhurried. One prisoner stopped walking, then another. A group near the fence turned their heads, confused. This wasn't propaganda. There was no shouting voice, no threats, no exaggerated claims. It was normal. A German officer, once proud, now wearing a worn POW jacket, slowly removed his cap. He stared toward the sound, listening carefully. "This is British radio," someone whispered. "No," another replied quietly. "This can't be." The announcer's voice followed the music. Clear English, calm tone, reporting the news of the day as if the war were not tearing Europe apart. No panic, no desperation, no fear. The camp, bit by bit, fell silent. Men gathered closer, not ordered to, but drawn by something they hadn't felt in years. Stability. One prisoner finally spoke, his voice barely audible. "They don't sound like people about to lose." No one answered him. They just listened. And, for the first time since their capture, doubt began to settle in. The radio did not stop. After the music ended, the announcer's voice returned. Steady, unhurried, almost casual. He spoke as if nothing extraordinary was happening, as if cities were not burning, as if millions were not fighting and dying. That alone unsettled the men listening. The prisoners leaned closer, drawn in despite themselves. Even those who barely understood English felt it. This was not how defeated nations spoke. The announcer reported events from the front. Not exaggerated victories, not heroic speeches, just facts. Losses mentioned openly. Advances described without celebration. A clear, composed summary of the day's fighting. One German sergeant frowned. "They admit setbacks," he muttered. "Why would they do that?" Another prisoner whispered back, uneasy. "Because they don't need to hide them." The room felt colder. The broadcast continued. The announcer mentioned production numbers, shipments, cooperation with allies, said plainly, without urgency. There was no desperation in his voice. A former staff officer clenched his jaw. He had spent years listening to speeches filled with certainty and grand promises. This was different. Dangerously different. "They sound confident," someone said quietly. A long pause followed. No one argued. Outside, a British guard stood near the door, arms crossed, listening without expression. He did not look proud. He did not look nervous. He simply listened. For the prisoners, that silence spoke louder than the radio. If this was what British radio sounded like during a war, what did that say about how the war was really going? That night, long after the radio was turned off, the camp did not sleep. Men lay awake, staring at the ceiling. For the first time, many of them wondered if everything they had believed might have been wrong. The next day, the radio was turned on again. No one asked for it. No one objected. The prisoners simply gathered, quietly, almost instinctively. This time, there was no surprise, only tension. The broadcast began with the same calm tone, the same steady voice. It spoke of movements on the front, of air raids, of supply lines stretching across oceans. The words were measured. Careful, honest. A young prisoner shifted uncomfortably. He had once believed the enemy would sound desperate by now, but this voice did not belong to a desperate nation. As the broadcast continued, something changed among the listeners. They no longer leaned in with curiosity. They listened with calculation. One man counted silently on his fingers, mapping the announcer's words against what he knew. Another stared at the floor, lips pressed tightly together. A former intelligence officer finally broke the silence. "If this is true," he began, then stopped. No one urged him to continue. They all understood the risk of finishing that sentence, even here, behind the wire. Another prisoner spoke instead, voice low. They wouldn't say this if it weren't safe to say. That was enough. The realization passed through the group without another word. It did not need explanation. For years, they had been told that the enemy survived on illusion and fear. Yet, here was a voice that had no need for either. A British guard stood nearby, pretending not to listen. He did not smile. He did not react. He did not need to. The damage was already done. That evening, the camp felt different. Not louder, not angrier, quieter. Men spoke less, thought more. And in that silence, a dangerous thought began to grow, not about defeat, but about how long the truth had been kept from them. The change was subtle at first. No arguments, no open defiance, just distance. Some prisoners began to stand closer to the radio when it played. Others stayed back, arms crossed, eyes fixed anywhere but the sound. When the announcer spoke of setbacks on both sides, one group listened carefully. The other shook their heads in silence. "This is exactly what they want," a man whispered to those near him. "To weaken us." No one responded. Later, in the barracks, the divide became clearer. A few prisoners repeated details from the broadcast in hushed tones, comparing them with rumors from transport convoys and guard conversations. They spoke cautiously, always watching the door. Others refused to listen. "Nothing has changed," one insisted. "It's all the same lies, just spoken more politely." But his voice lacked conviction. The officers felt it most. Men who once spoke with absolute certainty now paused before giving orders. Some avoided discussion entirely, retreating into silence. One senior officer gathered a small group late that night. "Be careful what you repeat," he warned. "Words travel faster than wire." Everyone understood what he meant. The radio was never banned. It didn't need to be. Its effect was already inside the camp. By morning, friendships had cooled. Conversations ended abruptly when certain men approached. The truth, calm, measured, and unforced, had done what shouting never could. It had split the camp. And once that happened, nothing could be put back the way it was. The radio was quieter now. Not because it played less often, but because fewer men admitted they were listening. Some prisoners positioned themselves where they could hear without being seen. Others pretended to sleep, eyes closed, ears alert. Information had become something to hide. The broadcasts continued in the same calm tone. No urgency, no triumph, just steady reports, names of places, numbers spoken plainly. That made it worse. A detail mentioned in passing, a delay here, a shift there, confirmed what several men already feared. It aligned too well with rumors moving through the camp. One prisoner folded his arms tightly. "If this is true," he said under his breath, "then we were sent into something very different than we were told." A nearby man shook his head, not in disagreement, but in warning. "Careful." Even casual comments now felt dangerous. Some men began keeping mental notes, piecing together a picture they never intended to see. Others rejected the broadcasts entirely, choosing certainty over doubt. The officers noticed the change. Questions were shorter, orders were followed more slowly, eyes no longer looked up with confidence. One guard passed by the radio without a glance. He did not turn it off. He did not increase the volume. He didn't need to. The prisoners had already learned something far more unsettling than any speech. Not that the enemy was strong, but that the truth had been available all along. And once that thought took hold, there was no way to silence it. The radio played one last time that week. No one gathered openly anymore. No one stood too close. They listened from doorways, from bunks, from corners of the camp where sound carried just far enough. The announcer's voice was unchanged, calm, measured, certain. He spoke of coordination, of steady progress, of time working in their favor, not as a boast, but as a statement of reality. That was when it finally settled. A senior officer sat on his bunk, hands clasped, staring at the floor. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then quietly, he spoke, not to anyone in particular. "We prepared for a short war." No one corrected him. Another man exhaled slowly. "They're not rushing," he said. "They don't need to." The words hung in the air. Everything they had heard over the years had been loud, urgent, absolute. Victory always just ahead. This voice had never promised victory. It didn't have to. One prisoner looked toward the wire fence, then back at the radio. "So, this is what confidence sounds like," he murmured. No one disagreed. The radio clicked off. The silence that followed was heavier than before, not empty, but full of understanding. That night, there were no debates, no whispered arguments, no denial. only a shared realization spreading quietly through the camp. The war was not ending the way they had been told, and for the first time they understood not because they were forced to, but because they had listened.